Well, shalom, my name is Todd Bennett, and I'm coming to you from under the Sukkah in Jerusalem, Israel, and today is day 7 of Sukkot. And it's the final day of the 7-day feast, often referred to as the last great day, Hoshana Rabbah. And after sunset today, we'll begin the 8th day, which is a high Sabbath, often referred to as Shemini Atzeret. Now, this is a time when we focus on the future fulfillment of Sukkot. Remember on the first day when we talked about the additional instructions for Sukkot? After the summary of all the annual appointed times in Leviticus 23, 4 through 38, we then read additional instructions. And let's take a moment to review that additional portion that's found in Leviticus 23, 39 through 43. It says, "Also, on the 15th day of the 7th month, when you've gathered in the fruit of the land, you shall keep the feast of Yahuwah for 7 days. On the first day there shall be a Sabbath rest, and on the 8th day a Sabbath rest. And you shall take for yourselves on the first day the fruit of beautiful trees, branches of palm trees, the boughs of leafy trees, and willows of the brook. And you shall rejoice before Yahuwah your Elohim for 7 days, and you shall keep it as a feast to Yahuwah for 7 days in the year. It shall be a statute forever in your generations. You shall celebrate it in the 7th month. You shall dwell in Sukkot for 7 days. All who are native Israelites shall dwell in Sukkot, that your generations may know that I made the children of Israel dwell in Sukkot when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am Yahuwah, your Elohim." Notice the mention to dwell in booths 3 times in this particular passage. And remember how we discussed that this feast is about the nations? Well, this points to a future time when the house of Israel would be sifted from the nations and replanted into the land. And we read about that in Amos 9, beginning at 9. "For behold, I will command and shake the house of Israel among all the nations as one shakes with a sieve, but no pebble shall fall to the earth. All the sinners of my people shall die by the sword, who say, disaster shall not overtake or meet us. In that day I will raise up the Succah of David that is fallen, and repair its breaches, and raise up its ruins, and rebuild it as the days of old, that they may possess the remnant of Edom, and all the nations who are called by my name, declares Yahuwah, who does this. Behold, the days are coming, declares Yahuwah, when the plowman shall overtake the reaper, and the treader of grapes him who sows the seed. The mountains shall drip sweet wine, and all the hills shall flow with it. I will restore the fortunes of my people, and they shall rebuild the ruined cities and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and drink their wine, and they shall make gardens and eat their fruit. I will plant them on their land, and they shall never again be uprooted out of the land that I give them, says Yahuwah, your Elohim." Now notice it's the Sukkah of David, and the reference to the fruit and the vine. This all has overwhelming reference to Sukkot. And this Sukkah of David also isn't just Sukkah in the Hebrew, it's et Sukkah. So we see the Messiah is the one that's going to build this Sukkah. We read about Yeshua making a profound statement on a prior Hoshana Rabbah, the last day of Sukkot. And he actually alluded to his fulfillment of Sukkot during that time. And we read it in John 7, 37 through 39. It says, "On the last day, that great day of the feast, Yeshua stood and cried out, saying, If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. He who believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart shall flow rivers of living water. But this he spoke concerning the Spirit, whom those believing in him would receive. For the set-apart Spirit was not given, because Yeshua was not yet glorified." He likely chose this day because this was when a tradition known as the water libation took place, wherein water was drawn from the pool of Siloam and poured out on the altar. This was also the completion of Sukkot. It was the last day, and he was therefore pointing to another future Sukkot. Now, not only would Yeshua send the Spirit on those who believed in him, but also he would return in the future with the set-apart ones. On that day, rivers of living water would flow from the heart of Jerusalem, and there's a powerful connection with Sukkot. And we read this in Zechariah 14, 8 through 21. It says, "In that day it shall be that living waters shall flow from Jerusalem, half of them toward the eastern sea, and half of them toward the western sea. In both summer and winter it shall occur. And Yahuwah shall be king over all the earth. In that day it shall be one. Yahuwah is one, and his name is one. And all the land shall be turned into a plain, from Geba to Rimmon, south of Jerusalem. Jerusalem shall be raised up and inhabited in her place, from Benjamin's gate to the place of the first gate, and the corner gate, and the tower of Hananel, to the king's wine presses. The people shall dwell in it, and no longer shall there be utter destruction, but Jerusalem shall be safely inhabited. And this shall be the plague with which Yahuwah will strike all the people who fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh shall dissolve while they stand on their feet. Their eyes shall dissolve in their sockets, and their tongues shall dissolve in their mouths. It shall come to pass in that day that a great panic from Yahuwah will be among them. Everyone will seize the hand of his neighbor and raise his hand against his neighbor's hand. Judah also will fight at Jerusalem, and the wealth of all the surrounding nations shall be gathered together, gold, silver, and apparel in great abundance. Such also shall be the plague on the horse and the mule and the camel and the donkey and all the cattle that will be in those camps. So shall this plague be." And then Zechariah 14:16, it gets very interesting regarding Sukkot. "It shall come to pass that everyone who is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall go up from year to year to worship the King, Yahuwah of hosts, and to keep et Hag HaSukkot. And it shall be that whichever of the families of the earth do not come up to Jerusalem to worship the King, Yahuwah of hosts, on them there shall be no rain. If the family of Egypt will not come up and enter in, they shall have no rain. They shall receive the plague with which Yahuwah strikes the nations who do not come up to keep et Hag HaSukkot. This shall be the punishment of Egypt, and the punishment of all the nations that do not come up to keep et Hag HaSukkot. In that day, holiness to Yahuwah shall be engraved on the bells of the horses. The pots of Yahuwah's house shall be like the bowls before the altar. Yes, every pot in Jerusalem and Judah shall be holiness to Yahuwah of hosts. Everyone who sacrifices shall come and take them and cook in them. In that day, there shall no longer be a Canaanite in the house of Yahuwah of hosts." So there will be no more mixing in Jerusalem. And this is what Yeshua was referring to on the last great day. He was speaking of a future day when he would come and reign. Now today, Jerusalem is filled with foreign gods and idols, like we saw the condition of the house of Jacob when they moved from Sukkot to Shechem. Jerusalem and her inhabitants need to get cleaned up before they will see Bet-El, the house of Elohim, return. Now notice in this verse that they are to celebrate et Hag HaSukkot. Et Hag, Hag literally means the feast, and HaSukkot, the Sukkot. So it's saying the feast of Sukkot, but we have that Aleph Ta attached to it every time. So we have et Hag HaSukkot. So we have the Messiah built into Sukkot at this point. And it's mentioned 3 times. Now recall the extra command for Sukkot that we just talked about, regarding those who are native born dwelling in sukkahs 3 times in that text in Leviticus. So these 2 passages are connected, and the emphasis points to the nations. The nations will come and celebrate et Hag HaSukkot. And again, that Aleph Ta is about the Messiah in bringing forth and fulfilling the Sukkot, as we read about in Amos, when he would rebuild the et Succa of David. So no longer is this feast simply called Sukkot. It's now et Hag HaSukkot, because the Messiah is the focus and the fulfillment, and he will draw and teach the nations through Sukkot. This becomes even clearer when we consider the prophecy of Isaiah. In Isaiah 4:1-6, it says, "And in that day 7 women shall take hold of one man, saying, We will eat our own food and wear our own apparel. Only let us be called by your name, to take away our reproach. In that day the branch of Yahuwah shall be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the earth shall be excellent and appealing, for those of Israel who have escaped. And it shall come to pass that he who is left in Zion and remains in Jerusalem will be called set apart, everyone who is recorded among the living in Jerusalem. when Adonai has washed away the filth of the daughters of Zion and purged the blood of Jerusalem from her midst, by the spirit of judgment and by the spirit of burning, then Yahuwah will create above every dwelling place in Zion and above her assemblies a cloud and smoke by day and the shining of a flaming fire by night. For over all the glory there will be covering, and there will be a tabernacle for shade in the daytime from the heat, for a place of refuge and for shelter from the storm and rain. So the Hebrew gives us a little more clarity. It says, Al kol kavod chuppah. And it means over all the kavod will be a chuppah. The kavod is the glory of Yahuwah. It's the same cloud and the fire over the tabernacle. And the tent of Yahuwah in the wilderness will now be a chuppah over every dwelling place on Mount Zion. And the chuppah is a covering provided by a husband over his bride when they get married. And a traditional Hebrew wedding takes place under a chuppah. So we see a picture of the bride dwelling on Mount Zion, covered by the chuppah of the Messiah, the branch. Now the branch is described as beautiful and glorious, and the fruit is excellent and appealing. And of course, this is why we wave the fruit and the branches as described in Leviticus 23:40 that we talked about on day 1. It says, and you shall take for yourselves on the first day the fruit of beautiful trees, branches of palm trees, the boughs of leafy trees, and willows of the brook. And you shall rejoice before Yahuwah your Elohim for 7 days. In doing this, we're exalting the Messiah as our true Sukkah, the one who is our chuppah, our covering. And that's exactly what Isaiah is saying in verse 6. And there will be a Sukkah for shade in the daytime from the heat, for a place of refuge and for a shelter from the storm and rain. And we don't always get that connection because sometimes the English translations say there shall be a tabernacle, but it's a sukkah. So there will be a sukkah for shade in the daytime from the heat, for a place of refuge, and for a shelter from the storm and rain. So instead of dwelling in his own tent in the midst of his people, Israel, as we saw in the desert, Yahweh will dwell with all his people. And the nations shall come to him, as we read about in Micah 4:2. It says, many nations shall come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of Yahuwah, to the house of the Elohim of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his paths. For out of Zion the Torah shall go forth, and the word of Yahuwah from Jerusalem. And of course, this will all occur through the judgment involved through the process of regathering the house of Israel from the nations, as we saw in Amos, that he'll sift the house of Israel from among the nations. And of course, the promise there in verse 11, 9:11, is that on that day I will raise up the Sukkah of David, which has fallen down. So the Sukkah is the Sukkot of Messiah. That's the fulfillment of Sukkot that we talked about on day 1. And that's why we rejoice for 7 days, recognizing the blessings of the past and the present, but also the great promise of this fulfillment of Sukkot, the gathering of his people to him and his house. And ultimately, Sukkot involves a relationship. And the point is that we draw ever closer to him so that we're no longer strangers, but rather we know him and his ways so that we can move from Sukkot to Bethel. Now, the end of Sukkot is always bittersweet. We've been rejoicing for 7 days, but we've been dwelling in sukkahs, and that's not always comfortable. It's like camping. So you're trying to rejoice and camp at the same time, and they don't always mix. And while we no longer have to dwell in sukkahs, it also means that the festival is over. The beauty of this is that while Sukkot is over, we now prepare for a Sabbath rest as we look forward to the 8th day, which points to a future rest when we leave the sukkahs and dwell together as one in the kingdom. So the end of Sukkot leads to a new beginning, and we have even more reason to rejoice because of that. So I hope that you found this Under the Sukkah series to be enriching and helpful. Thanks for letting me share my sukkah with you, and may we all be able to return to Sukkot with even greater understanding and joy next year in Jerusalem. So for now, my name is Todd Bennett from Under the Sukkah in Jerusalem. Hag Sameach and Shalom.